I thought I'd make a little video about what we're seeing in the Ukraine. I've been following the war very closely, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, or Ukraine. Why do you call it the Ukraine? Don't know, doesn't really matter. Anyway, the invasion. And I was going to talk about war crimes, a little bit about the history of war crimes and what we're seeing. Back in the Second World War, let's take it further back. Back in the First World War, we got involved in that war on the 4th of August 1914 because of the invasion of Belgium. And there were a lot of propaganda posters showing German soldiers bayoneting Belgian nuns and things like that. And for a long time afterwards, it was kind of laughed off as, hey, it's good propaganda, but it didn't really happen, did it? Actually, I don't know about bayoneting nuns, but the best historical studies where they have looked into this, something like 25,000 Belgian civilians were murdered. And they were usually murdered in reprisals, because what would happen is when we were retreating through Belgium, we retreated from Mons, held them up at Le Cateau, we were falling back towards the Channel ports to be on the safe side. Obviously, finally at the Marne, the French primarily and us with our piddly little four and a half divisions managed to stop them. We'd always leave snipers because you always engage while you retreat. And so German soldiers would be being shot and they didn't know who'd shot them. And very often that would just be blamed on the civilians. And the Prussian military doctrine was war is for soldiers, and if a civilian attacks a soldier, well, there'll be reprisals. And so very often it was not a case of Belgian civilians resisting, it was merely a case of the Belgian army and the British army retreating, posting people to just try and hold them off for a little bit to enable the rest of the corps to retreat, and Germans would go down. And our marksmanship was second to none at that time. And so then you'd assume, well, it must have been a local that shot me from somewhere, and they would massacre locals. And there are many accounts. So, unfortunately, this led to the consequence in World War II of many people, even people I have respect for, people I chat to, in Hatman's Element and stuff. There have been ones that don't believe the Holocaust happened. Like, well, it's just propaganda. Now, the best research was in the First World War, there were many atrocities, many reprisals committed on civilians, numbering, as I say, over 20,000 innocent civilians murdered. And certainly a lot of mayors were murdered because if they had any role in helping enemy soldiers like Downed Airmen, for example, escape, they would be executed. There are even accounts of German soldiers going to a house, the people being rude to them, and then, because they saw a pigeon, and this is, I can almost make a Crowley Temptations joke video of this. They saw a pigeon fly off their roof. They executed the whole family, saying, well, it was obviously a carrier pigeon, you're a spy. It was actually a capital offence in German-occupied France and Belgium to own a pigeon, in case it was a carrier pigeon. There's lots of interesting details about the German policies, and it did depend on which military governor was in charge. Some did not execute civilians, some seemed to revel in executing civilians. You usually were fine if you were fighting for the British. Don't forget that Ireland was part of Great Britain at the time. If you were Irish, you'd usually be fine, because they were hoping to get Ireland into the war, start a civil war amongst Great Britain. We all know about the Easter Rising in 1916 and Sir Roger Casement and all that stuff. And so probably a good policy was, if you did get, taken behind the lines, just say you're Irish, and then you'd probably be fine. But anyway, that's a massive digression. But unfortunately, because a lot of it was poo-pooed and, discredited, because there were things that are ridiculous, like the German corpse factory or, the crucified Canadian, which actually may possibly have happened. There's debate on that one. But it was believed after the war that a lot of the stuff was exaggerated and made up. The Germans didn't by and large go around raping and murdering nuns and stuff. It was rounding up civilians as reprisals for what they saw as insurgent attacks usually, which very rarely were. As I say, it was usually British soldiers or the Belgian army still kept fighting, even though, basically we held on to that little toe of Belgium. We held on to the Ypres, and that's about it. But the Belgian army did retreat and did fight till the end of the war. Anyway, so, and then going into World War II, obviously, the Holocaust did happen. Overwhelming evidence. Anyone wants to dispute me, I'll go into the Coher report, Himmler's chief statistician, who compiled all the numbers, and he accounted for the ones that were sent eastward for special treatment, and Operation Reinhardt and so on. Unfortunately, it's a horrible truth, but it did happen. We don't need to go into that for now. But so in terms of what's happening at the moment, so in wartime, atrocities happen. They always do. And I watch a channel called The Enforcer who does, nightly nightly for me, because I'm in England. He's in Alabama, I think, something like that. So middle of the night for me. Hence why I'm awake at the moment. I watch his channel, and he gives daily updates, looking at all the cammed videos, all the social media footage, everything of the Ukraine war, and we can assess what's going on somewhat from that. And it's quite unique, really. It's the first time I've been watching a war where we have loads of cammed footage from phones, and so we're getting that. But so back in war, atrocities always happen, and what happened obviously in the Second World War. We know on the 1st of September 1939, the Germans invaded from the north. Obviously, they had the corridor. The Polish had the corridor up to Danzig, but the Germans still owned East Prussia, so they would attack from the north, attack from the west, and attack from the south as well, where Germany curves around a bit underneath. So they were attacked from three sides, didn't stand much of a chance, but still fought for nearly a month, so pretty impressive. The thing that really finished off the Polish was the stabbing about by the Russians, because obviously we had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that had been agreed right beforehand on the cusp of the war, saying, hey, we'll chop Poland in half. And interestingly, Russia never let go of that. It's Ukraine because of the breakup of the Soviet Union. But like Lvov, for example, was the second largest city in Poland. And while there were loads of soldiers from Lvov fighting, for example, in Italy at Monte Cassino, the Yalta Conference was going on, and we were happily giving their country to the Russians, basically. And that's a national disgrace, as was Operation Keelhaul, which is another thing we could talk about another day. But in terms of the atrocities, look, firstly, the Russians basically murdered all the Polish army officers they get their hands on, all the intelligentsia, basically all the people that were educated anyway. They massacred them at the Katyn Forest. Recently now, because at the end of the war, basically what happened, Poland was shifted westward, to put it simply. So the Oder-Neisse line was established, so the two rivers on the edge of Germany, the Oder, and then cutting across sort of southeastward, the Neisse, and Poland was moved over. And as I say, cities like Lvov became part of the Warsaw Pact, modern-day Ukraine, but it was moved sideways. And so the site of the Katyn massacre in east of Poland is now Russia. It was several years back now. I don't have the dates off the top of my head. But there was a Polish plane that was flying in to commemorate the anniversary of that massacre that happened in 1939. And the plane, despite being piloted by the best pilots in the country, mysteriously crashed into a forest some way short of the airport at Smolensk. Now, I said in the previous video I thought it was shot down. We don't know, because obviously the Russians are not going to give anyone access to the site. It may well have been shot down, probably was, but it could equally well have just been misdirected down by the ground crew. They could deliberately, the tower control could deliberately have told them, hey, you're too high, get lower, get lower, get lower, until you hit the trees. The point was, it was coming into land, slow speed. There were survivors of that crash. Crashes that are not survivable is when a plane stalls and smashes into the ground. Almost every crash, when there's a bad landing, even if you go into a forest or something and you hit a load of stuff, even if the plane fragments, there are survivors. And in this case, there's cammed footage of Russian soldiers murder. Sorry, my phone has just done something weird. I need to plug it in. There's cam footage of Russian soldiers murdering survivors. Now, I was accused of slander by a Russian. It might have been a Russian bot. Might have been a member of what they call not the NKVD. That was Stalin's one. Not the KGB. What are they called now? I've forgotten the current one. Whoever it was, anyway. So someone was in the chat calling me a slanderer and a liar and stuff. Well, I'm sorry, there's cam footage of it happening, but much, much more evidently of value to me is the fact that the bodies eventually were sent back to the loved ones. So we should just say on that plane was the president of Poland, who was pro-Western, and all of the general staff of the army and the air force, and then I don't think they even have a navy, but if they do, it was the general staff and a load of dignitaries. Yeah, there was a good reason for those people to die. It was in Russia's interest that they did, and whatever happened, so the plane crashes. Eventually, after a lot of campaigning, finally some of the loved ones get the bodies back, and you don't really want to open up the body of a victim of a plane crash because it's not going to be pretty. But one or two of them did. They wanted to, say their goodbyes. They did want to see their loved one. And the one or two that did said, and this is all there in the regular media, this is not just people lying, this is them on camera saying about it. We opened up the coffin to say our last goodbyes. It was not our loved one in there. Why would you mix up the bodies when we have DNA technology, any number of ways to identify people? I'll tell you why. Because presumably that person survived and they got a bullet in the head. And if you get the body go back, who's a victim of the plane crash, yet they have a bullet in their head, then you know they've been murdered. And so that's my answer to those scummy Russian bots that I've had to block. Yeah, tell me why the loved ones had their bodies mixed up. Answer that one. I mean, it's a massive digression, but that was an example of a war crime. And what happened there, of course, we know that on the 22nd of June, 1941, the Germans attacked what was now, I suppose, the border of the USSR that was, halfway through Poland. They attacked, they retook the Katyn Forest. They didn't immediately find these mass graves. It took them some time. It took them, I think, a couple of years. I don't have the date, but eventually they discovered this massive area around the Katyn Forest, all these mass graves, and they exposed it to the world, because there's always Hitler's hope that what they could do is turn the whole of the West against the Russians, because, let's be honest, Hitler, Stalin, flip a coin, they're both evil, both megalomaniacs. Stalin, a much more intelligent man, but probably a lot more ruthless as well. I mean, he used to prefer to murder his commanders if he didn't like them, whereas Hitler, by and large, just sacked them. I mean, he sacked von Rundstedt like 4 times, didn't he, throughout the war, and kept reinstating him and stuff. But, hey, anyway, they uncovered it. They made big propaganda out of it. But, of course, the Russians immediately said, that wasn't us. That was the Germans that killed all of those. It took until something like, I don't know, was it 2002? Obviously the Russian archives, after the Soviet Union broke up in 91 or so, the archives did eventually get opened. And eventually, in that period of time between then and now, they finally admitted, it was us. GRU is the name of the current Russian Secret Service. It suddenly just sprung to my mind. But yes, the archives were opened and they admitted that they'd done this. But it took a hell of a long time. And there's lots of things that are still enclosed, not open. I mean, our archives, in their archives, in everyone's archives, because there's a lot of shady dealings that happened. But anyway, so that was one war crime. The other problem was, obviously, the Germans went into Russia and they committed mass rape, mass murder. They had the so-called hunger plan, where basically they take all the food from Ukraine, let the people die. If it wasn't for the Holocaust, the murder of the 6 million Jews and the 4 million other undesirables, in their words, the biggest crime would have been the murder of Soviet prisoners of war, because they took several million over the first year or so of the campaign, And what do they do with them? They chuck them into basically fields with no shelter, nothing, just some barbed wire around the side, and they'd have a laugh. Occasionally throw in a crust of bread and watch the Russians fight one another for it, and they just let them all die. You know, the ones that survived were very, very few, and usually because they're high-ranking officers, and they had some value. And so the Russians committed some terrible crimes, and please don't let it be said that it was always just the SS, it was just the Einsatzgruppe, and it was just a Himmler's lot. No, all the Wehrmacht committed atrocities, because they were still under the direction of the Army Command. They were still under, the OKW, the Oberkommando Wehrmacht, was mainly in charge in the east, but OKW, was the overall command, Oberkommando Wehrmacht. OKH, Oberkommando Heers, was the primary sort of body that was in charge of the army, because Heers is army. But either way, they were getting directions from the top to assist the SS in every way, and to go about. And it's interesting, actually. I've read some diaries from some of the German soldiers, and they start off. Look, it's going to be a digression. It's going to be a long video. I was reading one, and this was a soldier who was going into. I got this from Christopher Browning, by the way, the noted historian who was there in the David Irving Lipstadt trial. And it starts off, he says, I'm going into, initially into Ukraine, fighting against the Russians, we see these poor Jews knocking around. They're not able to get any food. I can't be so harsh. I'm giving them some of my rations. I won't go through it day by day. Within a month or so, he's initially saying, look, please don't read this letter to my children, our children. He's writing this letter to the wife, because it's not been very nice what we've been doing. We've basically been starving people, and we've been shooting people. We've been told, we need to round up these Jews, we need to kill them. And this is just an ordinary army man, this is not SS. Then, within another month, he's saying, please read this letter to my children, because this will go down in history. What we're doing is spectacular. I went to a wonderful execution the other day. We shot, goodness knows how many hundred men, women, children. And then, next letter, I'm so gutted, I had to do another job. I really wanted to go to the execution yesterday. It's amazing, the transformation. He's gone from giving his own rations to people in Russia, even Jewish people, because he sees their plight, to actually being gutted that he can't witness the execution and saying, look, you got to tell all my kids about this. It's, it's historical. So what you see in war is that people can degenerate. When they see all these awful things happening, they see their mates raping a girl, and they think, hey, that looks like fun, maybe I'll do it too. And that moral compass that you have just goes. And it can happen to anyone. But in the climate of the Wehrmacht, that happened. And what we saw as well, obviously the Russians, they saw what happened to their citizens. They saw the mass rapes. They saw the murders. They saw the people that had been starved. And eventually, of course, let's cut to the chase. So come June 1944, we invade in the West. The Germans brought forward the Russians brought forward Operation Progression to basically time it with D-Day. So the Germans would be attacked from both flanks. And that was good of them. And so come June, moving into July, Operation Progression starts, organised by Rokoszewski. He had to really fight as well, Rokoszewski. This is someone who'd been tortured, by the way, by the NKVD. He had no fingernails, which Stalin found hilarious, apparently. And they were saying, look, we don't agree with your plan. The Stavka, the Russian commander, was saying, like, no, come up with a better plan. He's like, no, this is the plan. Take it or leave it. They sent him out, and they said, look, we'll give you 10 minutes. Think about it. Come back when you've got a better plan. Rokoszewski comes back, and he says, no, still the same plan. And Stalin basically says to him, well, okay, well, be it on your own head. Meaning, if it doesn't work, yeah, it probably is your head that's going to roll. Very literally, or at least a bullet in the back of the neck. And it worked amazingly. Attacked with two-pronged attack, absolutely smashed Army Group Centre, completely destroyed it. And after that, I don't speak Russian, but I understand that it's like with German. You have, Sie and you have du. And if you know somebody, you say du. But and that's the, the polite, that's the familiar word. But if it's not a friend of yours, you don't really know, you say Sie. Hitler never, ever let anybody use the personal one. The one person that did, he eventually told them to stop doing it. But in Russian, apparently, Rokoszewski, after that attack, he was so successful, Progressio, he was the only person he would allow to speak to him using the sort of familiar term, as though they're friends, because it was so successful. And then rolling on forward, so they go through Poland like a knife through butter, because Army Group Centre's gone. Army Group North is trapped up in the Baltics. I believe the little pocket holds out even till the end of the war. It's the 8th of May. Army Group South also is being rolled back. Crimea had already been retaken. We had the Yalta Conference in Crimea. And anyway, so we get to the borders of Germany. And we have the Battle of the Zela Heights, which is just beyond the Oder River. So now the border of Germany in the east is... it's Frankfurt am Oder, basically. It's on the Oder River. And just beyond that, you have the Oder Meadows, and then you have the Zela Heights, which is a mountainous terrain about 90 miles from Germany. And this was really the last defence of the Germans. And, of course, the Russians, it's about January 45. They've rolled through Poland. They're coming into Germany. And one of the Russian soldiers, he's just amazed, because he's seen all these German towns. And I don't know if you've been to Germany or not, but I've been there many times. And their towns are nice. Germany's a wealthy country. It was, come 1900, along with Britain, along with America, they're the most developed countries in the world. Russia is still very poor. And so one of these Russian soldiers is like, look, they have these beautiful towns, these lovely houses. They have these tram systems. They have all this stuff. And yet they came to my oblast, where all we've got is a little farmhouse and a bunch of dirt tracks. So they were vengeful. They'd seen what had happened. And I don't know if this is an order for up high, but it seems to be, because it was so ubiquitous. The raping of German women, possibly followed by their murder, but certainly men of military age, just being shot out of hand. If you want to learn more about that, go to Max Hastings' book, Armageddon. It's, pretty heavy stuff. But let's quickly move on, because it's gone on long enough. Let's go on to Ukraine-Russia situation. What we're seeing now is that on the east and the west of Kiev, the Ukrainian armies are moving forward, and they're going back and they're retaking towns that have previously been occupied by the Russians. I saw in a basement, in a camera video, a bunch of Ukrainian men, maybe even boys, hands bound behind their back, all of them shot in the back of the head. Very reminiscent of the old days of Russia. Now, maybe they were soldiers, maybe they were volunteers, doesn't matter. If you've been able to put if you're able to tie their hands, they're prisoners of war. You cannot just shoot them out of hands and murder them. I saw a lady, an old lady, go into her garden, lift a piece of plywood that was covering something, and there was her daughter there. She had not been struck by artillery fire. She was lying dead in her garden. Presumably she'd gone out and harassed a Russian and said Slava Ukraina, or, chanted at them to get out or something. She'd just been murdered. This lady's daughter. And she's lying beneath a bit of plywood. The mass graves as well. 200, I believe, was it 180? Or was it 280 bodies were discovered in one of these towns. And it's again, these towns that have been liberated back again. So they were taken by the Russians, now moving forward. Ukrainians are retaking this town, and they're discovering the crimes, basically. The one that really surprised me, they cammed a dog home, and the Russians have shot all the dogs in it. And they were showing as well, this was a different video. It was going down the street, and there's this lady, there's her house. She's got like a wire cage around, and a dog bowl there. Someone just shot a dog for no reason. it seems the Russians are that spiteful. Look, I get that. I don't like dogs. I was bitten by one not long ago. But I understand that people do love their pets. It honestly seems like there's a mass campaign to murder all the Ukrainian pets. Interesting. I like ancient history. I like ancient Egypt. Whenever you see a picture of an ancient Egyptian, or tomb painting, whatever, look beneath the chair they're sat on. Almost certainly you'll see a pharaoh hound. They used to love their dogs, and they never wasted space beneath the chair. So, but that's what seems to be happening. Not only murder of civilians for no apparent reason, just vengeful spitefulness, but also murder of pets as well. The good thing to see, though, is that the Ukrainians finally are doing the sensible thing, and they're actually striking back. Their country has been struck, so strike back at the Russians. And so, was it Belgrade? I read it 10 minutes ago, and I've already forgotten the name, but it's 25 miles north of the border of Ukraine into Russia. A fuel silo was struck by 2 helicopters. Now, the Ukrainian Interior Ministry won't confirm or deny that they did it, but I doubt it was Russian helicopters that did it. And why not? You know, we've seen loads of Ukrainian fuel silos being struck, so it's nice for it to happen in return. And at this, just to differentiate between them and the Russians, if you see the Russian helicopters, they don't have the bravery to actually fly in and shoot a precision target, because they know they get hit by a Stinger. And so, and incidentally, another one was shot by a Starstreak missile that we've sent over there, so that's good. That was a MiG-29, but yeah, so the Starstreak's supersonic missiles doing very well. The Russian helicopters, they stay over airspace that they know is safe because they control the ground. They turn their helicopters up to about 25 degrees, maybe a high angle attack, and they're just launching their missiles up in the air to get long enough range that hopefully they'll land on some Ukrainian town. So it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are getting in some precision airstrikes. Look, I'm not taking sides or anything here, but I'm going to call out war crimes. So I see civilians blasted by a tank. If I see people with their hands tied behind their backs, being shot in the back of the head, if I see everybody's pets being murdered, if I see people's daughters being shot, we got to call it out. And let's be honest, armies everywhere do this kind of stuff, as I've highlighted from history. But yeah, let's call out these things when we see them. And we'll see a lot more of it as these towns are retaken. Unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of it. We saw Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev. He was talking in German, understood most of it, and he was basically saying, bear witness to this, look what they've done, because he was in one of these little towns north of Kiev. He was saying, look, you all need to see this, because, the whole place is just devastated, and they didn't ask for this. They've just been invaded. Imagine if you lived there, and you got your house, you got all your stuff in it, and, it gets blown up. Or imagine even worse, if you're like someone like me, a man of military age. Imagine that, just someone tying your hands behind your back and shooting you in the head. Or imagine like your daughter getting, murdered by a Russian, or even, I'd say even worse in a way it is, getting raped. Let's call out these war crimes. We don't take sides. If the Ukrainians do war crimes, hey, we call those out too. I said about that, putting all these Russian soldiers up on press conferences, getting to talk. That's a war crime too. That explosion in Donetsk may have been a Ukrainian war crime. Don't know. May have been false flag. But look, we're going to see more of this, because it does seem that the Ukrainians are on the offensive now. They're getting a hell of a lot of weapons from the West. It does seem they're pushing the Russians out, and the Russians are looking for a solution that saves face. But unfortunately, we have to expect a lot more of this stuff. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thanks for listening if you did.